I'm sure somebody out there recognizes where this piece is from. If you don't, in case you need a little bit more of an obvious hint, it's from this iconic Fallout 4 piece. It goes on the back right here, replacing the part that I made last year. So what we're talking about today is how you can take a video game weapon and turn it into a 3D print. If we haven't met before, I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield. And of course, this is a very iconic weapon from Fallout 4, and I'm working on upgrading this with some 3D printed parts from the original build series from last year. So that's, like I said, what we're doing today. We're replacing the back part with a 3D printed, more detailed, more accurate looking piece. Now, before we jump into Blender, I know you're going to answer one question right off the bat, which is, can I just take the 3D models from a video game, export them somehow, and 3D print those? And the short answer is probably not. Under many circumstances, how a 3D model is built for a video game is very different than how a 3D model has to be built for a 3D printed object. So while it may be possible to export the 3D model and use that as a starting point, depending on how things are built for the game, it may not be a whole lot better, if maybe worse and more annoying, than just starting from scratch. That's what we're doing today. We're starting from some reference images from the Fallout 4 inventory system and rebuilding this piece. Let's dive over to Blender. As with all tutorials with Blender, here we are inside Blender. This is Blender 2.8 point something whatnot. But regardless, the one thing that's really awesome about building props in Fallout 4 is that it's got a really cool inventory system that lets you basically view the objects from multiple angles and take really good screenshots. So the first step here is to take some of the pictures I took of the back of the piece, and I'm going to load them in as reference images inside Blender. So here are 4 views of the piece I'm trying to build. Now the one thing that's kind of cool about reference images in Blender is that they are actual objects. You can move them around, scale them, and even rotate them just like normal objects inside of Blender. Our first step here is to actually take these images and kind of mock up the piece in the orientation they would be. So for example, here's the top view of the image. I'm going to leave this as is in the top view and orient the other pieces around it in the different views inside Blender. Alright, as I move the cursor around here and rotate around, you're going to see I've got the reference images roughly aligned so that they kind of recreate the object we're making here. Of course, this isn't going to be perfect, so it's not like you can use it for exact sizing from all angles, but it should be good enough to allow you to build the object. So let's start with that process right now. For most of the cases, it's going to just be figuring out which mesh works best with various parts and modifying it and going from there. As for the exact sizing of this piece, well, that's going to really depend on your final prop, and I'll leave that up to you, but we'll talk more about that at the end. So why don't we start off here with just a simple box and get the rough shape of this part of the back of the piece here. They go between these two views. The cube's not going to perfectly line up with each dimension like on each image, so it's important to simply choose which image is going to be the master for that particular dimension. So for example, what I think I will do is the top image here is going to be the master for length and width, and then on the side images we're going to use this image for the master for the height. That way if the length and width don't quite line up here, it's not that big of a deal. They have to line up here, and that should work all right in the long run. So now let's start building this little groove right here, and then the kind of beveled piece past it. We're going to cheat a little bit. We could do something fancy where we take some Boolean operations and cut a groove into it, but what might be the easiest thing to do is we're just going to select this face. Should I get the whole face selected? It looks like it. I'm going to extrude it just a tiny bit. So just the tiniest bit of extrusion. You can't really see it because of the, the reference image. Scale it down a little bit like that. So scale down the entire face just a tiny bit. Extrude it again. We're going to go across the length of the groove. Extrude it one more time just a tiny bit and scale it back out to where it's about the right size. I want to make things a little bit easier to see what I'm doing because the reference images are probably in the way for you guys. So here's a little trick you can do. Let's go up to our hierarchy up here. I want to right click, unseen collection. Choose new collection, and then let's call this guy, let's see, we're gonna rename it, so double click on it. We're gonna call it reference. I am gonna drag all 4 of our reference images down to it. So now, for example, collection here contains our actual object, reference contains our reference images, and then I can uncheck the entire collection and therefore be able to see what I'm working at. So now you can see I got a little bit of a groove right there. Let's finish off the end piece. So I'm going to bring the reference images back. But first, before I do that, I want to make sure I have this outside face properly selected. And then what I'm going to do, I'm just going to extrude it out and scale it down to it's about the right size. Go back to solid mode, and there you go. We've got something that roughly has the shape. There's no rounded corners, but we'll deal with that in just a minute. This is going to attach to the back of my current prop. I need to cut a slot out right here because there's a wood piece that runs the entire length of the prop, and that kind of provides support, so I need to make sure this piece can slide over that wood backbone. To do that, I'm going to do some Boolean operations, and at the same time, I'm also going to cut out this face right here, so because eventually some more details go in here, but they're inset a little bit. All I'm going to do is create a new cube. I'm going to scale it up to where proportionally it looks right. And then I'm going to add one more cube. I'm just going to duplicate this one. I'm going to scale this one so that's roughly the size of kind of the inset area here in the back. I should say, scale it so that it's inserted into the piece the rough size of the area in the back. Obviously this thing's much bigger, but what this is going to do is going to be used, this piece where it's overlapping here, intersecting, it's going to be cut out and going to be left a little bit of a cavity there. So I want to join the 2 pieces that we're going to actually cut out together. So click on both of them, Control J, join them together. We're going to name them cutout. And then let's go back to this piece here, give it a useful name. Then jump to the modifiers context, a little wrench. We're going to add a Boolean modifier to our main piece. Operations difference. Object is going to be the cutout one, whatever you called it. Let me see if in wireframe mode, let me make sure it looks more or less all right. I think it does. So let's hit apply. And then now this guy right here, I'm just going to press H to hide it. And you can see I've got my inset cut in there, and I've got the area that's going to go over the backbone. Okay, back to working on the beveled edges. Now before you do beveling, you need to apply scale. As part of this process, we've changed the width and height of this piece by scaling it. So you need to hit Control A and then choose scale. Nothing should actually happen visibly, but that's behind the scenes math stuff. Now let's bring our reference images back in and figure out what exactly we need to bevel. And the answer is pretty much everything. The big bulge here for the fusion cell, we'll deal with that later. Nearly all these edges have to be beveled, so let's work on that right now. So hide our reference images. Go into edit mode in this piece, and I want to switch to edge edit mode up here in the upper left hand corner. Okay, we need to left click on all the edges we want to bevel. Make sure you get in there inside the grooves as well. And obviously to select multiple edges, you want to hold on shift as you press left click. Oh, and if at any point here when you're trying to select multiple edges, if you accidentally left click without shift and go, oh shoot, just hit Control Z and it'll take your selection back one step and you can do the right selection. Let's press Control B and immediately left click. Nothing visually happens, but over here in the lower left hand corner you can bring up the bevel menu, and we're going to change some numbers over here to get the effect that we want. For segments, if it's not set to something like 5, go ahead and set it to either 5 or 10 depending on how detailed you want things to get. This represents the number of edges that will approximate the curved shape. And then for width, I'm just going to keep clicking on the right arrow until I got basically a bevel that looks good to me. If you see the mesh do anything weird, like something flashes, or you can see like double faces, you've probably gotten a little too aggressive in the bevel effect, and that will cause issues with 3D printing, so pull things back a fair bit. Let me just load up the reference images and kind of look at how those are. There's a little bit of beveling there. There's definitely a fair bit of beveling, right? You can see from this position that there's a fair bit of beveling. So let's take those away. Look dead on the back. Maybe a little. Let's try to go a little bit more. Oh, there we go. See how you got that going there and that going there? That means I've pushed the bevel too much, and the math is causing things to overlap that shouldn't be overlapped. So let's pull things back. I think that will look pretty good for this piece. So now I've got something more or less looks like the basic shape of the piece. Let's start adding in some details. So the first detail I want to work on is this lip that's at the front edge of the piece. So let me get rid of the reference images again. Let's go back into edit mode. And we want to return to vertex mode up in the upper left hand corner here. And all I'm going to do is same kind of thing where I created this groove, except that I'm going to create a lip. Just a very small extrusion. Scale it up just to make it a little bit bigger than the piece that was originally there. We can go to solid mode to get an idea of just how big it's going to be. That looks pretty good. And then I'm going to extrude it one more time. Now we've got a small little lip around the piece, just like the reference images have. Now the big thing we have to worry about here is this holder of the fusion cell. That's roughly a conical shape with some things cut out in it. Let's add a cylinder, watch. Show you what I'm going to do. Now when you add a cylinder for 3D printing, let's crank up the vertices. So this will make it look a little bit smoother. So let's go with like 256 is a good number. So now I'm going to move this piece around such that its diameter more or less matches the largest diameter of this conical detail. So it's looking about right, but of course the back of this piece, if you look back at our reference here, well, it's a lot smaller. So all I'm going to do is jump into edit mode. I am going to select the back face of the cylinder and just scale it down until it looks about right. This part of the detail also needs a lip, so we're going to add that the same way we added the lip around the main body here. So I say that looks pretty good. Of course, now we have the problem to where our giant cylinder piece here is kind of moving into the territory where our backbone is going to go. But what we're going to do is just move some vertices around that are going to be hidden in the object that you're not going to see. So let me just kind of shove them somewhere and I think we'll be alright. I think that will solve the problem. I just flatten them out and then move them out of the way. Of course, to flatten those vertices, it's S for scale. The axes you want to flatten along, whether it's X, Y, Z, and then the number 0. So bringing up our reference images again, there's only one big piece left that I have to physically add, at least, you know, excluding all the little details back here. And then there's these two little triangle things that kind of support the bottom of the piece that will attach to the backbone. So I'm just going to model those up right now using a simple mesh. Now that the triangle pieces are attached down here, it's time to start cutting in some details. And there's really two types of details along the outside of the body of the piece. If I bring the reference images back up, you've got these little cutouts here. And then you've got these types of kind of more deep cutouts. So you got narrow, half cylindrical cutouts, and then you kind of got deep, almost like a bullet-shaped cutout. And what you want to try to do is you want to do as few a number of Boolean operations as possible. We've already done one set of Boolean operations on this piece. So I want to create all the different shapes that are going to kind of cut in to the object, join them together as one, and then perform the Boolean operation all at once. The more Boolean operations you stack on an object in Blender, the greater chance you have of something going terribly wrong. So let's start here with these little cutouts. All that's going to be is I'm going to create a cylinder and flatten off one side. All three in the right spot. Let's shift left click each of them and do Control J to join them into one object. So now I need to create a shape that more or less can work to cut that piece out. Once again, that's going to be a cylinder, but we're going to do a few other operations. Take a cylinder, rotate it, and scale it down to the right size and or shape. That looks about right. I'm going to jump into edit mode with the cylinder. And isn't that wonderful? There we go. If you go to wireframe mode, you can actually see the object a little bit better through the reference images. Just extrude the thing a few times. Don't do any scaling. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times. Okay. With the 7th face still selected, we want to turn on proportional edit. That's up here in the top, this little circle with a dot in it. Click that. And then right next to it, these are the types of proportional edits. So what this is going to do is you're going to scale down the face you have selected, and it's going to cause other vertices within a certain radius of that face to be adjusted according to this shape right here. Which I think what we want to do is let's just keep it at smooth for now. And then press S to start scaling. And you're going to see this gray circle appear. Let me actually zoom out a little bit. So you see that big gray circle that just appeared? Use the mouse wheel to change that such that only the extruded faces are selected. So you can see how I've got the gray circle only going around the faces that I added to the original cylinder. Now, as I scale this thing down, you're going to notice that the other faces all kind of get scaled with it in a proportional method. And it's going to give us a much more cleaner shape to the shape I'm trying to go for. That looks pretty good. All right. So now I'm going to move this thing into place. And then we'll copy it and move it into the other 2 places where it needs to go. So fun little tip here. You know you can rotate your view with the middle mouse button. And you also can use the numpad. But what if I want to jump to the opposite side at the front? Because, you know, number 1 on the numpad moves you to front. You control plus the number, and that throws you to the other side. So front goes to back, left goes to right, top goes to bottom, and so on. Front, control 1, back. 1, front. Control 1, back. Australia, America, Australia, America, Australia, America. Oh, goodness. Yeah, anyway. That clip's on YouTube now, isn't it? That'd be, oh my goodness. Anyway, okay, let's move this piece. Let's move this last cutout thing in the right spot. As with the 3 previous pieces, let's select them all, join them together, and then select this set of 3 with the other set of 3 and join those together. And now here's where we hope that Blender doesn't choke and die. Select our original piece. We're going to try one more Boolean operation. So under the modifiers context, a little wrench. Let's choose Boolean operation. Oh, and this time I need to select all the things. We're going to call this detail cutout, so that way I know what I'm working with. Go to wireframe mode. That actually looks pretty good. So let's apply the modifier, and then I can hide these objects. Let's go to solid mode, and hey, that looks pretty cool. Oh my goodness, I can't believe that worked. Okay, there is one more cutout we have to do to this piece up here. So for that, let me bring back our detail cutout. When you press H to hide something, all it does is it hides it up here in your little collection hierarchy. So just click the little eye off to the right of it, and you see the piece comes back. I'm going to switch to edit mode, select one of these little these shapes here, do Control L for linked all, Shift D for duplicate, move it out of the way, press P for separate, choose selection, and now I've got a new object with the right shape. Let's go back and hide the original ones. Alright, let's bring the reference back up. So what I'm trying to do right here is get this cut out. Man, this is a little screwy, but I'll figure it out. Because it's got a cutout and it's got a piece that's jumping out. That looks just wonderful. Okay, just wonderful. Let's start with the cutout. I'm gonna actually move this thing out of the way. Hey, that's pretty much what I wanted. Cool. All right. Now I need to add a little extension piece right here, and to do that, I'm gonna take our detail cutout. I'm gonna duplicate it just because I don't really need it anymore. But you know, there's no reason to delete stuff. Let's jump into edit mode and get rid of all this end here that's all kind of scaled down. So select those vertices, press X, choose delete vertices, and now I kind of have just an open cylinder. So we need to select all the vertices on that face side, press F to create a new face, press A to select everything, Shift N, just math thing, don't worry about it. And then let's move this guy back into where it should be. Now, there's a lot of little details here in the form of screw heads. So all I'm going to do is model one of those, and then I will copy and paste them all over the place. And for that, it's really just going to be as simple add a cylinder, scale the top down a little bit, do a Boolean operation to cut out the slot. So I've got something that more or less looks like a Phillips head screw. I'm just going to stick this in each place where it belongs. I'm going to say that's looking pretty darn good right there. It actually looks pretty close to the reference. Most of the remaining texture at this point for the reference comes from the fact that it's, there's actually painted texture on the piece, and that'll be done later on post 3D printing. But for now, that structure's looking pretty good. All we have to worry about now is this part in the back right here. So the first thing I think we need to do is, it looks to me, this little dark area here, and you can see it right here, is a bit of an angle. So there's actually two insets right here. So let's figure out how we're going to model that. And our solution is probably going to be the loop cut. So do Control R and move your mouse cursor around, and eventually you probably should see a yellow line like this. It's kind of actually mimicking the cut we want to do. Use the mouse wheel to make two of them, then left click, and then left click again. And what we need to do is move these two pieces to be the right spot, because this area in between the two lines is going to become that ramp going backwards. So I think if we scale, oopsie daisy, okay, no oopsie daisy. Okay, if we scale along the z-axis, we can move these pieces closer together, then move them along the z-axis. And what we want to do is look at our reference here. I want to align this piece to where it is more or less lined up with that slanted area. Let's go to wireframe mode so I can see what I'm doing. So I think that looks pretty good right there. Then what needs to happen is I need to select this face back in there. So I can either just do all four vertices or do a face select, it's up to you. And then move this guy back in. So I'm going to grab it and move it in the X direction. And just like that, you've got that slanted right there. Very cool. For when it comes to building the detail here in the back, you've got two screws. We've already got those. You can copy and paste those. And then these little fins, those are all just going to be little rectangles that you kind of angle or slope down, and then just make a whole bunch of them. And then in a moment here, we'll worry about this knob and this little inset cut. So I think we're down to the last few pieces. Let's look from the back here and bring up our reference images. We need to make this little kind of cut into the inset. That's going to be pretty easy. I'm going to take a cube, scale it down to about the right size, a little too big. I need to punch a hole in it right here and then bevel the corner. So the last detail we have to make for this piece here is this weird little 12-sided knob thing in the back. I'm going to walk you through step by step with this particular part, because it's going to get involved with some very interesting vertex manipulation. So I'm going to do a little bit more work than just basic adding meshes and some operations and modifiers. I'm actually doing some work with the individual vertices. And this is a very helpful skill to have with Blender and 3D printing. Not only for creating more intricate detailed shapes, but oftentimes when you run into problems with your print, you're going to have to go in and learn how to manipulate individual vertices. So kind of walk through this process will help that at some point in the future, if you run into problems, you kind of get an idea of what types of tools you will have to use to fix said problems. So the first thing we're going to do is add a new cylinder. And the one thing interesting about cylinders in Blender is if you want to make a polygon, well, a polygon is just an approximation of a cylinder with a very low side count. So if I set the vertices to 12, what you end up getting is a little 12-sided polygon. Now the next thing I'm going to do is subdivide it. So I've got a couple sides to each actual side. So that each side gets divided into like 4. So let's jump in edit mode, right click, choose subdivide once, choose subdivide twice, and now you can see that each side here has 4 parts to it. That's going to be important for making these little raised knob areas here in just a minute. What I then want to do is go to some other view, but then just jump into wireframe. So sorry, either side or front view. Select the top two sides, or the top two rings here. Scale them down a little bit. Let's see, how does that look? That's probably pretty good. So deselect these guys using a box select with the middle mouse button. Then let's scale this in just a little bit more like that. Move it close to the top like that. Okay, so now this is where you get into some of the weird mesh manipulations. Because how we're going to make these little ridges here is that around each of the major edges of our 12-sided polygon, these two sets of faces right here are going to correspond to one of those ridges. So we need to start by deleting the faces that are on the inside. So go up to face select mode in the upper left hand corner up here. And now I'm going to start selecting these 4 faces on each of the sides. Now this next part is one of those more important details. Press X to begin the delete process, but only choose faces. Don't choose vertices or edges, choose faces. And what you're going to get is basically a see-through mesh looking thing. We got to fix that with some custom mesh geometry. We'll jump to edge select mode up here in the upper left hand corner. And now you need to select these 2 edges that all kind of run around the top here, that are all kind of the tops of the empty spaces. So you don't have the edges here selected on the pieces that are solid, just the empty spaces. So let's jump to one of the side views, or actually in this case either top or front view, sorry, and press E for extrude. And let's extrude it straight along whatever axis you have that's basically moving along like this. And you want to line these new extruded edges up with pretty close to these edges right here. So what you've got now are a bunch of faces just kind of dropping down from the areas you just cut out. Now it's time to build a whole bunch of new faces. So we're going to jump into vertex select mode. Just deselect everything. This is the procedure we're going to go in. We're going to do this face first. So that vertice right there to one of the extruded vertices, to that corner, to that corner. So you kind of see how I'm selecting the 4 vertices that are going to become a face, and then press F. And we're going to do the same set of vertices for each piece, and just loop around the entire object to fill in those sides. So I'm selecting those 4 vertices and press F. If the face looks weird for some reason, that means you probably selected the wrong set of vertices. Just undo, select the correct ones, and keep going. Let me show you something. Like, let's say here, for example, I just selected the wrong vertice. If I create a face, you're obviously going to see something that looks weird here. That's kind of an example of what you would see like if you screw something up. So that's just give me an idea. Or maybe I do something really weird. Like, what if I select the vertice back there? See, that's really weird. So those are the kind of things you want to look for if you know you might have screwed something up or not. It obviously doesn't look right. And here we are back to where we started. Same process, but now we're going to work on the other side. So these 4 vertices here, the 3 on the outside, 1 that's extruded, press F and work backwards around the piece again. Now one more set of faces we have to create, and that's these guys at the bottom. I'm just going to select all the little vertices that kind of go around the bottom of these little inset parts, press F, and then repeat that process for the remaining 11 sides. Awesome. So the piece is pretty darn close to being complete. What I think I'm going to do, I'm going to scale this in a little bit more. There we go. So that makes it look a little bit more correct. So that's good. And then I want to switch over to vertice mode, select everything, do Shift N for just 3D math stuff. Just don't worry about it, just always hit Shift N. It will fix problems. And then let's move this piece into place, and we're going to do one sort of Boolean operation to create the little groove for the bolt. To create the little divot for the bolt, I'm going to use a sphere and cut out a hole here in the top. So let's just add a new UV sphere. It doesn't have to be super detailed, that's what there's fine. So let's just shrink it down, move it into place. Modifier context, Boolean operation, difference, bolt divot, right? Of course, you know, you want to make sure remember whatever name you happen to give things. Alright, let's just make sure doesn't anything weird happen. No, that looks about right. Apply, and then we'll hide this guy. Yep. Let's take one more of our bolts, duplicate it, make it bigger so it fits in there correctly. I know it's a Phillips head screw in there, but screw that, I'm not making another bolt. Okay, and I think with that, this detail piece is complete. The last thing we need to figure out is just how big it has to be. Of course, that depends on exactly what cosplay piece you're attaching it to, but let me show you how you figure that out. First things first, you want to join everything together into one giant object. So switch to wireframe, do a box select for everything. Let's make sure that guy's a primary because why not? Control J. Now everything is one gigantic object. In order to figure out the exact size of things in blenders, we have to enable a add-on called Measure It. So go up to Edit, choose Preferences, go to Add-ons. And you guys see I already have it enabled here, but how you find it, you go to the search box, just type measure should be good enough, and you see 3D view, measure it. Go ahead, hit the little checkbox, and then close it out. Measure It does come with Blender. You don't need to install anything separately, you just got to enable it. And then when you go into edit mode, let's deselect everything. Over here on the right hand side, you want to choose view, and this is some of the sub panels. Down at the very bottom, you have a little show button, and then you have a whole bunch of add measures. So let's look into adding measures. For me, I want to measure from the inside of the lip on one side to the other. So I'm going to select those two vertices, opposite sides. Let me go open up the configuration tab. I'm going to bump up the text size quite a bit and change the color to be a little bit easier to read. Then hit segment, and nothing happens because then you got to hit show. And what you've got here now is a measurement between these 2 points. If I zoom in, take a look, it's 3.89 meters. That's not actually correct. This thing defaults to meters, but 3D printing uses one blender unit being 1 millimeter. So this is actually 3.89 millimeters. Let me figure out how wide it has to be by measuring my cosplay piece in front of me here. And it measures 3 1/8 of an inch. 1/8 plus 3 times 25.4, that's millimeters. 79.37, so let's do 80 millimeters. Okay, so let's scale this guy up until that is 80. Sound effects are highly encouraged. Let me see what the height measurement is. So we're going to jump back in. Going to select some relevant vertices. So that one up to that one. Yep, and we'll do another segment here. That is 73.54. So this thing is actually a little bit squished, isn't it? What I'm going to do is just scale it in the Z-axis just a tiny bit. So scale Z. There we go, that's about right. And frankly, you can't tell that it's scaled in the Z-axis a little bit, because only just a slight bit distortion, but that'll work fine. Okay, I think we can call this 3D modeling process done. You can export it as an STL file, drop it into your slicer, and print it up. The good news is, well, it looks like it'll fit quite all right. Now, I'm not attaching this to the piece today. I'm going to do that not too far in the future here on this series, so be sure to hit subscribe, like all that stupid YouTube stuff. I wonder if they don't like when I say stupid YouTube stuff. So that way you get the more future videos, blah, 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 in this series. My brain's just fried. It always is by the time I get done with these things. But with that, thank you guys all for watching. Once again, I'm Jason, and have a great week.